Chapter 8. Unseen Visitor. Terrified about the condition of Ned and Oscar, Nancy rushed toward them. The peculiar sweetish odor she detected grew stronger as she moved closer. I'd better cover my nose and mouth, Nancy thought. She whipped off her scarf and tied it securely over her face, just below her eyes. Then she hurried to Ned's side. His weight seemed to have doubled. With difficulty, she dragged him away from the overpowering smell. Then she rushed back and pulled Oscar by his shoulders over to where Ned lay. She felt their pulses and found they were normal. "Thank goodness," Nancy murmured. At this moment, a cool breeze sprang up that Nancy hoped would soon restore the two men to consciousness. "The birds!" she thought suddenly, and hurried back to the cage of sick ones. To her horror, they all lay on the ground, their feet in the air. "They're dead," Nancy murmured. "How terrible." She wondered if they had died from the disease, or if the intruder had deliberately sprayed them with the killing substance. With these questions burning in her mind, the young detective hurried back to Oscar and Ned. They were still unconscious. Nancy was alarmed that they showed no signs of recovery. "I hate to tell Mrs. Thurston. She'll be so worried about Oscar, it may have a bad effect on her health." As Nancy was debating what to do, she removed the scarf from her face. To her relief, Ned slowly opened his eyes. He looked at her, then closed them again. Nancy knelt by his side. "Ned, are you all right?" she asked. Once more he opened his eyes, then said weakly, "Where am I?" "You're in a safe place," Nancy assured him. "Just take it easy." Her words aroused Oscar, who blinked several times, then finally opened his eyes wide. "Who are you?" he asked, looking at Nancy. "I can't see very well. Everything is blurry." Again Nancy was terrified. Had the numbing substance affected the man's eyesight permanently? "As soon as you feel like walking, we'll go into the house and bathe your eyes," she said gently. A few minutes later, both he and Ned declared they felt all right, although Ned still looked groggy as he got to his feet. Nancy stood between them and linked arms with them. She guided the two to the kitchen, where they sat down at once. "Oscar, tell me where your eye lotion is, and I'll get it," Nancy offered. The man said it was on the second floor in a bathroom cabinet. She went for it, and as soon as she returned, filled an eye cup with the fluid. After Oscar had bathed his eyes several times, he declared they were much better. "How's Martha?" he inquired. Nancy said she had been resting quietly. "I decided not to tell her what happened to you two." "That is best," Oscar agreed. He smiled wanly. "We'll keep that as our little secret." Nancy told him and Ned that most of the dinner was ready, but she had to broil the lamb chops. "Do you feel like eating now?" "I do," Ned said quickly, and Oscar nodded. As Nancy turned on the stove burners again, she asked the men to tell her what had happened. "I was going into the cage with the sick birds," Oscar said, "and told Ned to stay outside. Before I had a chance to open the gate, somebody crept up from behind, put his arms around Ned's and my necks, and held pieces of cotton saturated with some sweet-smelling stuff right over our faces. One good whiff and we were goners." Nancy suggested that perhaps they could find the discarded pieces of cotton to determine what the knockout fluid had been. All this time she had said nothing about the dead birds. But now Nancy felt she should, in case Oscar wanted to do something about them. When he heard the sad story, Oscar lowered his head and sighed. "What's done is done," he said philosophically. "But it is a great loss to me, not only for sentimental reasons, but this is my livelihood. I can almost agree with Martha that we have been jinxed." Ned tried to console the bird owner by telling him that the man who had accosted them would certainly be caught and made to pay restitution. "I hope so, and soon," Oscar said. In the meantime, Nancy set the piping hot food on the table. Mr. Thurston had little appetite and had to be coaxed to eat something. To please his wife, who had awakened and joined them at the table, he bravely sampled all the courses. As soon as they finished eating, Martha asked Oscar to carry her to bed. While the couple was upstairs, Nancy and Ned cleared the table and washed and dried the dishes. Nancy had just finished cleaning the broiler when Oscar came downstairs. "I want to go outside and look around," he said. "Nancy and Ned, will you come along? Let's see if we can pick up any clues to the unseen intruder." Nancy and Oscar got flashlights. While the man went to the rest of the cages to be sure none of the other still healthy species had been harmed, Nancy and Ned began to search for unfamiliar or freshly made footprints. An intense hunt revealed only that there were so many of them it would be difficult to distinguish a stranger's from those of friendly callers. Nancy had a hunch that the person who had attacked Oscar and Ned would not have gone near the house. For this reason, she followed several sets of footprints that led in a direction away from the dwelling and toward the road. She and Ned found a few separate prints in a muddy area, but they were only partially clear because the man who had made them had been running and skidding in the softened ground. "I guess we'll have to give up," Ned suggested. At the road, the couple turned and started back. They had gone about halfway to the cages, with Nancy flashing her light from left to right, when suddenly she stopped. "See something?" Ned asked. Nancy went over to a clump of bushes and stared down at an empty can with a new label on it. "Chloroform!" "I guess this was what the intruder used," she said. Ned started to pick it up, but Nancy caught his arm. "Let's wrap this up so we won't ruin any fingerprints on it," she suggested. She removed her scarf and carefully tied it around the can. Ned carried it back to the house. Oscar came to the kitchen and they showed it to him. "I think," said Nancy, "that what happened today should be reported to the police. Suppose Ned and I take this evidence to Chief Pepper and tell him the story." "That's a good idea," Oscar agreed. A little while later, she and Ned said goodbye and told the bird owner they certainly hoped he would have no more trouble. He smiled at the couple. "You are wonderful," he said. "However, I can't hope for good luck yet. But maybe there'll be a break soon. Nancy, I'm depending on you and your father to straighten out this whole problem." Ned grinned. "The Drews will do it," he assured the man. Half an hour later, he and Nancy arrived at police headquarters in Harper. Chief Pepper was just going off duty, but he waited to talk to them. Nancy introduced Ned, and the officer led the couple into his office. Nancy told him that there had been sabotage at the Thurston place. Ned will explain what happened to him and Oscar. As the chief listened to the story, he frowned again and again. Finally, he said, "This is serious. If things get any worse, I believe we'll have to post a guard out there to spot intruders." Nancy now handed the chief the scarf with its contents. "I surmise that the can has fingerprints on it. That's why I didn't touch it." Chief Pepper smiled. "You're a true detective, all right." He opened his desk drawer and took out a cellophane bag into which he rolled the can. "I'll send this to our laboratory at once." The officer promised to let Nancy know the results, as well as Oscar Thurston. Then the young people said goodbye and went to their car. As they were driving slowly through the main street of Harper, Nancy suddenly said, "Ned, would you be willing to go with me to the ballet?" "Where?" "Right here. I saw a sign back there. We just have enough time to catch the evening performance, and I think maybe we can pick up a clue there." "A clue at the ballet?" Ned asked, puzzled. "Yes," Nancy replied, "and maybe a very good one." End of chapter 8.